The way we talk about sexual violence has improved a lot. There's been a lot, again, I'm looking around the room and thinking, okay, it's all of you who made that happen. There's a way that we talk about it now that we weren't talking about it a generation ago or 2 generations ago. And it is still painfully hard to acknowledge that someone we know, someone we love, someone we admire is capable of abusing, because we have this sort of evidence-poor, harsh punishment industrial complex and too little else.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Summer, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so excited to welcome you to our event tonight with Meg Stone, presenting her new book. Presenting her new book, The Cost of Fear, Why Most Safety Advice is Sexist and How We Can Stop Gender-Based Violence, in conversation with Shamika Gregory. Please join me in welcoming Meg and Shamika.
Thank you. Wow. So I love bookstores, and I have always imagined that this night would happen someday, and I just want to thank you all for joining me. I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction, and then Shamika and I are going to have a conversation. On a dusty mat in a high school gym, or in a cramped classroom with desks shoved into a corner, I teach teenage girls to resist sexual coercion. The class is called self-defense, so some of them come in expecting to learn how to fight off a creepy stranger with kicks and punches from an action movie. Instead, we're teaching them to resist a guy they know and like. My co-instructor will portray that guy, the one at the party who invited her to go somewhere quiet, to listen to music, he said. All night he made her feel special, getting her drinks, ignoring other girls' flirtations. But when they get to the upstairs bedroom, all he wants is sex. He's charming the first time she refuses, telling her she's beautiful and it's not a big deal, and she doesn't have to worry because he's more experienced than the other guys she's dated. When she refuses again, he yells. She shouldn't have come upstairs if she was going to be a tease. He could hook up with any girl at this party, and why did she waste his time? She gets up to leave. He blocks the door. There's a sprawling debate about situations like this one, and most of the sides people take have nothing to offer her in this moment. For many, the problem is him. He should have been raised to respect her and taught how to get consent. If that fails, a group of well-trained bystanders should rush into the bedroom to stop him. For others, she should have known better. The problem is her poor choices, or the problem is sexual liberation. If there were tighter rules about young men and women being alone together and a complete erasure of same-sex intimacy and gender fluidity, she wouldn't be facing the prospect of sexual assault. I believe we need a deep and specific investigation of where he learned that it was okay for his sexual desires to eclipse her limits, an investigation that would guide us toward the kind of change that will forever eliminate situations like this one. But that is a long-term endeavor with no guarantee of universal success. Meanwhile, a girl is stuck in a bedroom with a guy who doesn't care that she refused sex, and that guy is blocking the door. We teach her to stand up, move away from him, put her hands in front of her chest and yell, "Let me leave." He might move aside, probably calling her a bitch as he does. In that case, she learns to get out fast. Other times, he grabs her wrist. We teach her to break the grip, using her whole body weight against his hand, to strike the head or groin if he doesn't relent. A person who tries to assault her may be larger and have more muscle, but everybody's body has weak points: eyes, head, groin. I'm not training ultimate fighting champions. The goal is to cause enough pain to end the threat, and the surest way to do that is to strike the vulnerable parts of his body. Some sexual assaults can be stopped with ordinary strength. And then this is a piece from the end of the introduction. Every time we alter our lives to avoid violence, we are making a political statement, whether we intend to or not. Crossing the street to avoid a homeless person says one thing. Not leaving your kid alone with a parish priest in the wake of a clergy sexual abuse crisis says another. There are two kinds of safety choices, those that disrupt power structures and those that leave them unquestioned. Safety decisions that challenge power inequities require more fortitude, but they also lead to real change.
Thank you. Thank you for that reading, Meg. That was a little taste. If no one else is excited to get the book, you should be. I promise I was not paid to say that. I read the book. It is amazing. It is fantastic. Meg, you did a wonderful job, and you did it while working a full-time job, running an organization, and everything else. So I just want to take a moment. Can we appreciate her efforts? That's pretty incredible. You mentioned in the book about the cost that I took notes. $122,000 per survivor is what it costs in terms of lost wages and psychological care and all these different things. But you named your book The Cost of Fear. Can you tell us why?
Sure. So it breaks my heart that we live in a society where one of the ways we make people care about sexual and intimate partner violence is by calculating the economic impact. But that is the reality. And this very well done, very thorough study by Sarah DeGue and others at the United States Centers for Disease Control, who I'm sure is having a fabulous time right now, calculated the cost of a rape or a sexual assault in criminal legal proceedings, healthcare, lost wages, and several other impacts. And we can put a number on the cost of rape, and a lot of that cost is borne by other institutions and entities. However, the cost of fear cannot be quantified and has not been quantified. I spoke at Suffolk University this afternoon, and there was a professor in the group who said that one of her students had told her that she was not going to take the class that met in the evening because she was afraid to walk back to her dorm after class. And if you add up all of those missed opportunities, all of those missed shifts, I interviewed a woman who works in the STEM field, and she was saying that she has a rule that when she goes out with her work colleagues, she only drinks one beer because she doesn't want to be intoxicated, that doesn't feel safe, and she doesn't continue to party the way that her male colleagues do. And because she doesn't have those relationships that are built through drinking alcohol and whatever else, she's not getting as much traction on her research. So the ways that people of all genders who are affected by gender-based violence restrict our lives to avoid violence is a huge impact, and it is borne by folks who are most targeted.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the ways that we shrink our lives to try and stay safe and all the different, not signing up for the evening class and not taking that night shift to try and keep ourselves safe, right? When we know it's not stranger danger anyway, as you said, right? It's the person that we know. And with that, I wonder if you could explain one of the things you talk about in your book is safety through compliance versus safety through resistance. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means and how it shows up in our lives?
So most of us, particularly those that are or have been read as women, have gotten any number of pieces of advice about what we need to do to stay safe. Don't park near a white van. Don't wear a ponytail and
Carry your rape whistle.
Carry your rape whistle. Yes, rape whistles are still a thing. It's all still. Like, the sad thing is the students I taught 20 years ago and the students I taught last month were saying the same things. So there is the way that I conceptualize this type of safety advice is called safety through compliance. And it is the type of safety advice that is often given by men in authority, particularly those in law enforcement and other sort of male-dominated fields. And the way it is structured is if you don't do these 10 things, if you don't wear your headset, if you don't wear a ponytail, if you don't go anywhere alone, that's the way to be smart. And if you're smart, you will be safe. And if you don't do those things and someone assaults you, then it's your fault. I went to a safety lecture, and the refrain of the lecture was a bunch of men telling a bunch of women, don't be a victim. And the thing about safety through compliance is that there's no evidence that it makes any of us safer. It hasn't been shown by any research to effectively reduce any type of violence, including stranger violence. And what it becomes, it slides so easily into coercive control. It's another way of men controlling women and telling women to diminish ourselves and diminish our lives. And I wanted to say one other thing about it, which I can't remember. So I'll talk about safety.
I mean, I can crack a joke because I have plenty of those. Because I'm like, where do we get the notion that no one is sexually assaulted during the daytime?
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Well, again, I don't know where it comes from, but the problem with sort of telling people to be smart and then defining smart as following and complying is not consistent with any definition of smart that I'm familiar with. It's not critical thinking. It's not questioning what you're told. It's not analyzing the world around you and coming up with the best case scenario. So that sort of street smart, like the street is more dangerous than our homes, plus the compliance-based safety advice is something that a lot of us have heard and continues to proliferate. So what I do in the book is contrast it with what I call safety through resistance. And that is individual safety skills so that we can interrupt harm and violence against ourselves and others in the moment. And the feminist movement and many Black liberation traditions have embedded self-defense training for individuals in political organizing and work for social change. And that is particularly relevant to the types of violence that are caused mostly in private, mostly when we're alone. So giving folks the skills to interrupt someone else's desire to harm them can and does create change for a lot of folks. And what is most important, well, there's several things that are most important about safety through resistance. So what is important about safety through resistance is that it truly does aim to develop critical thinking. We teach skills, we have people practice skills, we model different ways of resisting, and our intention and our purpose is to give people a menu of options and invite them to choose what works and what doesn't work. And what works for one person would absolutely be meaningless to another person. And so what we're hoping to do is build the skill to recognize and resist coercive control from people close to us and people in authority, and to be able to decide in the moment how we are going to handle an unsafe and unfair situation that we didn't create. So it's not your fault does not have to mean there's nothing you can do.
I love that. I love that. It's not your fault doesn't have to mean there's nothing that you can do. I hold on to that. And I feel like through your whole book, you are highlighting the illusion, the deeply embedded delusions and illusions that we hold on to. Like, it's very unreal. And like I said, in this moment, I was cracking a joke. You didn't have to really answer, but it's okay that you did. I really do question, like, where do we get that idea that no one is sexually assaulted during the daytime, right? That's not a real thing, but we're taught to be afraid of the dark. Right? That's not something that ends. And so where your book challenges all of those misconceptions and deeply held beliefs that hold us back so long. And so you shared, really one of the things you shared about was also the belief that, when we call the police and we move forward and justice will be served and all of those things, you talk about that. But we know, those of us who do this work, I see many folks who do this work in this room, we know that that is not the case. People are frequently further harmed by systems if they get any kind of justice. And you give an example of a grandfather who molested his 3 granddaughters. And the family, he was in prison, but when he came out, the family handled it really by protecting the granddaughters. They shielded them. They made sure that he was never in the home when the granddaughters were there, ever. The grandmother stayed married to him. That was her choice. But they were never forced or urged or coerced into spending time with the grandfather or forgiving the grandfather or creating like this illusion that it didn't happen, right? And like, that was a beautiful story, but when they shared it, they were attacked. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, how could you stay married to him? How could you do this? How could you possibly, right? All of those things. And so it's just an example of how we, as a society, like we our own needs and fears, we often like are louder than the voices of survivors. And you have a quote in your book, I promise I'm leading to a question. Rigid evidence poor laws give us the illusion of taking abuse seriously while doing nothing to make anybody safer. And so can you just talk more about how our outrage, our own needs, creates that?
So we started this conversation, and I start the book by talking about compliance and resistance in terms of personal safety. But this concept of toxic compliance really shows up in our legal response to gender-based violence. And that story is one that I was very honored to have shared with me. But one of the things that I found really surprising, actually, I've been in this work for 30 years, and when researching this book, it was surprising, is that the broader public opinion about support for harsh punishment of sexual abuse and other gender-based violence is not reflected by crime survivors. There's a group, Alliance for Safety and Justice, that surveyed people who have survived violence or crime, and there is a disparity across, liberals, conservatives, and moderates, but more than 50% of each group, including conservatives, prefers rehabilitation and education and counseling to harsh punishment. And so I went looking for evidence of, examples of folks that have done like what this particular family has done. And this story was shared with me by Joan Tabachnik, who I know many in this room know, who I was grateful to interview. She's done a lot of work bringing survivors and people who have caused harm together. And one of the things that was so surprising to her as she was putting on these public dialogues of communities that have found these very survivor-centered, very restorative ways to address gender-based violence was that the public was so judgmental of folks that are actually doing more to keep folks safe. I interviewed a criminologist by the name of Megan Mitchell, and she and a colleague looked at 25 years of research on sex offender registries. And this is among, our politics are divided on whether the sun rises in the morning.
The sky is purple or not.
But sadly, one of the few areas of political consensus is support for sex offender registries and for harsh punishment. And Megan Mitchell looked at the research and found no evidence that sex offender registration alone reduces recidivism. Thoughtful, evidence-based, skilled therapeutic intervention plus oversight has been shown to work. And even, this publication that I read from the DOJ SMART office, which is the office that oversees sex offender registration, one of the author of the publication said something to the effect of, it would be logical for public policy to follow the evidence. However, that is not the case sometimes. And I was like, okay, how many edits of that act, like what did that person actually say? And how many layers of government bureaucracy before our current political climate toned that down? But I want to just mention sort of how I got, how I saw myself in that story. It was probably about 15 years ago, and Impact got a call from a mom who had this incredible sense of urgency about scheduling a self-defense class for a group of middle schoolers. And she wanted to do it immediately. She canceled other activities. She, got a bunch of kids together in record time. And I knew that she had a very deep concern, and she really struggled to get us there. And I walked into the church where she had decided to hold the self-defense class, and she pulled me into the stairwell. And she told me that she had been looking at the sex offender registry and was enraged that they let a registered sex offender move into her town. And she could not believe that they would let him live so close to her children. And she was absolutely incensed. And, the thing that she did was she thanked me for all of my work, and she treated me like I was a firefighter who showed up and put out the fire before it spread to her house, and I was saving the world. And the reality is that we were in a Catholic church. And it was only a couple years after the Boston Globe had broken the story about how widespread the sexual abuse crisis was in the church. And I wish that I had had the presence of mind to have any kind of conversation. But what I realized from that experience was that when we demonize people, and we have like a class of people who harm, who we're willing to harshly punish and treat like less than human, and then we have to deny the rest of child sexual abuse if that's our only option. So what I was hoping to get at with that chapter is that folks who have experienced harm are pretty clear about what healing, what repair, and what accountability looks like. But public policy cannot and will not achieve that nuance. And so as a result, we throw money at ineffective policies. And I'm looking around the room at all of the amazing people who do life-saving, life-changing work that is very under-resourced because punishment is more popular than what actually works.
I just need to sit with that.
Don't worry, it's uplifting at the end. Chapter 10 is really uplifting, I promise.
I told you it's a book that strips away all the illusions, right? And that's painful to sit with, especially if you're new to it. Through doing the work, I learned some of these lessons myself. I didn't know that coming in, right? I'm like, of course you want the bad guy put away, because that's what we're taught. The bad guy must go away, and you never want to see them again. And then you talk to survivors, and you get a completely different story, right? And I love that you share that, and it's like the portrait that we paint in society of who is doing these things and who we're willing to punish. And you mentioned belief perseverance. Mm-hmm. And you talk about a study where 20%, I think it was college students, but 23% of women who are raped by an acquaintance did not describe it as rape. It's like their mind couldn't make that connection. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it was not until the mid or late 1980s that we had any solid evidence that the majority of sexual assault was from people we know. And a lot of this came from a psychologist named Mary Koss, who had the idea to ask college women about behaviors rather than the label rape or sexual assault. So the behaviors that met the definitions of rape and sexual assault, people would say, yes, I have experienced this, or I have been a victim. People would answer yes to that. But when the criminal word, rape, sexual assault was used, people would not identify their experience with that label. And even to the present day, in 2017, between 2017 and 2018, the year that the Me Too hashtag first went viral, the number of folks who reported to the National Crime Victimization Survey that they had experienced rape and sexual assault more than doubled. And sociologists, and I apologize to them in advance in public, I can't remember their names, actually looked more carefully at the data and found that the jump in the huge jump was only among white women, not among women of color and not among men of any race. And then the following year, the National Crime Victimization Survey, the number of people who used the word rape went back down to its previous levels. So clearly, the way we talk about sexual violence has improved a lot. There's been a lot, again, I'm looking around the room and thinking, okay, it's all of you who made that happen. There's a way that we talk about it now that we weren't talking about it a generation ago or 2 generations ago. And it is still painfully hard to acknowledge that someone we know, someone we love, someone we admire is capable of abusing, because we have this sort of evidence-poor, harsh punishment industrial complex and too little else.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it leaves us in this gap where people gaslight themselves, right? Yeah. It's like, this can't be real. It's right. They can't be a rapist and I can't be a rape victim because this is my best friend or my neighbor, or it can't be them. But yet it can, right?
Right. And so we're all afraid to park near a white van.
And how?
I mean, it's Cambridge. If you find any parking, don't give it up. Who cares about the van?
I was like, never fear the van. You talk about institutional courage in your book, and you define it as...
That's Jennifer Freight, not me.
No, okay. Well, in the book, that you wrote, as the commitment to seek the truth and engage in moral action despite risk, unpleasantness, and short-term cost. And there's a theme throughout your book of multiple organizations that have formed to resist and to create ways around essentially institutional courage, institutional accountability, because there's so little belief that it will ever take place for very good reason, right? And you gave the example of Friends of Sarah that I love. Will you allow me to talk about Friends of Sarah?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So Friends of Sarah, I'm not in STEM at all, but Friends of Sarah is an organization for women in STEM who've experienced abuse and sexual harassment and different things in the labs or from their mentors or different things like that. And so what these women did is they came together and we said, we may not be able to fix this. We may not be able to get your institution to comply, but we can find you another placement. We'll work together to make sure that you can still get your degree, that this person who you have documented how they're being inappropriate with you is still not the one to sign off on whether or not you get your PhD, right? And I was so excited to read about it. I was like, oh, I love this. Yeah. But it pissed me off that it exists. Yeah. Like I'm so angry that it's necessary. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, what does it mean for an institution to be brave enough? What will it take for institutions to get courage and to actually do the right thing?
Right. I wish I knew. So I'll talk a little bit about Friends of Sarah and a little bit about the uplifting chapters at the end. So if you're slogging through chapter 4, know that there is an end in sight. So one of the things, as a person who has been working to prevent a systemic injustice by building individual skills, I very deeply understand that the institutions that are supposed to protect us, that we're supposed to depend on, are very unpredictable and undependable. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you make a report and you get a trauma-informed person who knows what they're doing, and they are able to give you the healing and the repair and the accountability that you need. And that very same institution, because you got a different Title IX officer, might completely fail the next survivor. So I started, one of the heartbreaking but illuminating realities that I found as I was researching the book is this idea of fear about safety interrupting people's career trajectory was showing up over and over again in biology, pharmaceutical industry, the whole science, technology, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, yes. And every woman in STEM I talked to referred me to 400 other women in STEM. And I eventually found this woman whose name is Sarah Cordozo Duncan, and she started out being a social worker. And after sitting with so many women who loved science and were passionate about their work and were enduring harassment and assault and abuse because the person who controlled their career was not somebody they could go around. So what she started doing was she gave up on systems, but she wasn't willing to just validate people's feelings. She wanted to do something to help folks. So she developed this network of women mentors to support women who were navigating these incredibly harassing, incredibly toxic work situations. And then she got another network of colleagues that would help people find their way to a different lab, a different mentor, a different advisor, and as she put it, anything except out of STEM. She was talking about some of the women that she worked with as being 6 years old and staying up late because they loved their chemistry set. That person does not need to leave STEM. That person needs a path. And she was very blunt about not letting our hope that the system will work be so overpowering that we let it become more powerful than what's actually going to work for this person. And again, it's not, I love Hallmark movies, and that's not the Hallmark movie ending, but it is the reality of getting folks out of situations where they are experiencing harm. So in terms of the second part of the question, what does it take for organizations to truly change? I wish that I had some broad, sweeping answer, but I did get to interview folks from a few different organizations that had made a wholehearted commitment to addressing abuse and harm and truly preventing future harm. There's one organization in particular that I will uplift. It's a theater company on the North Shore called Gloucester Stage, and it was founded by yes, I see the theater people clapping. It was founded by a man named Israel Horowitz, who was a very prolific playwright and a very prolific sexual abuser. And for years, women were reporting, and the board was not doing anything. Nobody did anything. Women had this incredible, I spoke to a couple folks who had been involved in Gloucester Stage for decades, and there was a stage manager who saw it as part of her job to never leave this person alone with actors. Now, stage managers have enough to do. Nobody needs that. But she was not about to let this person be alone with anybody who he might harm. And eventually, there was a New York Times piece about one of the survivors that had been incredibly harmed by him, and several other survivors also spoke up. And the board and the staff really showed institutional courage. They cut ties from him. They fired the PR consultant who told them to say as little as possible. And they really committed to listening, to accountability. The board president at the time, Liz Newmeyer, talked about how she would read all of the emails coming in about the situation including the emails from survivors who were, sharing what happened. And she really cared about responding to them and acknowledging it. And they went beyond taking responsibility for the past, and they really transformed their culture. And the result of that transformation really maps onto safety through resistance. They have a written policy that says there is no story we cannot tell without respecting your boundaries. They welcome resistance. They welcome actors to speak up and advocate for themselves. They welcome folks to have input into any sexual or intimate scene and what they are and are not willing to do. And everything is a work in progress, and nothing is perfect, and nothing is amazing 100% of the time. But organizations that are resilient around wanting to make space and invite people to constructively resist. And the moment where one of the costume designers that I interviewed, the moment that she knew that the change was for real was when somebody felt entitled to interrupt a tech rehearsal to address a sexist comment. And like, tech rehearsal is the time when everything takes forever and everyone is really stressed out. And the fact that everyone put that to the level of importance that they could interrupt that rehearsal, that was a moment where that person at least thought like, okay, this is for real. So institutional courage is a concept that Jennifer Freyd came up with. There is a center for institutional courage. But I went looking for, I asked several prominent violence prevention experts. I'm like, tell me all the organizations that you're really proud of. And well,
very short list.
Crickets. So, I am very passionate about institutional courage, and I'm very passionate about organizational change. And I understand its limitations, which is why I'm very passionate about self-defense.
So I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to you all, because I know you all have questions too. And I'm using this quote all the time now. I just need you to know that. So, one of your interviewees said, it's not that we're vulnerable as indigenous women, it's that we're targeted. And I always talk about, in my work, people being, your identity is making you marginalized, making you more vulnerable. And it's, again, right, it's like, you're not vulnerable, you're targeted. It makes you more targeted. And I'm using it all the time. I'm building it into my vocabulary. But we know that resistance involves risk for everyone. But for some people, it involves more, a lot more, right? Lives are on the line. For targeted communities, there's very real reasons why you would stay silent. And so if you could speak to, what does it mean and what does it look like to resist when you are part of a targeted community and the consequences for you and your family threaten every part of your life?
Yeah, and I just want to, Shanda Poitras, who is the person who said that quote, is the executive director of Turtle Mountain Impact. It's a Indigenous-led impact program located on a tribal reservation in North Dakota. And with my partner and my mom in the room, I will say Shanda is my favorite person on earth.
It's brave.
It's very brave. But they'll both be like, yeah, Shanda's my favorite person on earth too. And she has, she has done unbelievable work to create a self-defense program that meets the cultural realities and the political realities of an Indigenous community in a conservative state. And there are so many BIPOC-led, Indigenous-led, trans-led self-defense organizations that are really looking at this incredibly enraging reality that folks who are more marginalized are often criminalized for protecting their bodies. The organization Survived and Punished has been leading a lot of campaigns one of the folks that I interviewed for the book talks about how a lot of times when folks are incarcerated, they become invisible. And so a lot of the work of the campaigns is to use visual imagery and to use photos or paintings or drawings of criminalized survivors so that we are keeping folks visible, folks like Marissa Alexander and so many others. So part of it is building up the legal defense infrastructure so that folks who are criminalized are able to get quality representation. One of the Survived and Punished members that I interviewed was saying that one of the survivors that she worked with was depending on a pro bono tax lawyer from a large firm to argue her self-defense case. And the other thing that's so important with safety through resistance is that it's so much about choice, and it's so much about making the choices that make sense for your life. So maybe striking someone feels like the right self-defense option for one person, and another person knows if I strike someone, I'm going to get charged with a crime. So we don't say, you know, either you hit someone or you're doing it wrong. We offer other options. And this is not necessarily a highly targeted community, but highly targeted in a different way. I had one experience several years ago where I was working with a group of women in STEM who were relatively new in their careers. And we were talking about speaking up, setting boundaries, saying no. And everyone in the room said, yeah, if I did that, that would be career suicide. I could not do that. So we had to come up with a number of indirect, you know, performatively polite strategies that folks could use to get out of that unchosen hug from these superior scientists so that they could have something they could do in the moment that felt safe, not just physically, but also professionally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I know I reached out to you because I read your book and I was immediately like, oh my goodness, this is so necessary in this moment. And everyone's teaching all these know your rights courses and all of those things. And it's like, but what does it mean if you're a person who knows that your rights are going to be violated?
Right.
And you don't feel like you have a right to say anything. It's useless. I don't want to say that. Let me take that back. Not useless. It's just not performing the function that you want it to. And thinking about your work and how necessary it is for this moment for different communities. And so I really just wanted to appreciate you for that and open up the floor to anyone who may have questions for Meg.
What are some of the key barriers to this message landing as broadly as you would like it to land?
One key barrier is, to be honest, the resources to communicate the message. We at Impact Boston, we have this idea that we are going to get the word out and we are going to reach, you know, this media outlet. And, you know, we're inundated with requests for class, and that op-ed takes a back seat to the community group that really needs us. Another barrier, I think, is that self-defense is pretty poorly understood. That self-defense is often associated with firearms, or it's associated with sort of highly athletic kickboxing and martial arts. And, you know, when I say I teach self-defense, I wind up in a bunch of conversations that I don't want to be in. So I don't say that on planes anymore. I learned my lesson on a very long flight. But I think that's one barrier. You know, the amount of money that corporations have to market what they do and research what they do is just so much compared to the very paltry resources that we have. And I think we're doing more than we possibly can with the resources we have. But I think communication, understanding of the issues, and probably 10 other things I'll think of tomorrow morning when I wake up and wish I had said.
You'll email it to us.
I'll send you an email. Okay. Hey, Catherine.
Hi there. What do you think about what happened with the Spanish women's soccer team, where the coach kissed a player unprovoked, unwelcome, and he was sent to jail?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, you know, interesting that you should bring up sports. I was in Virginia last week with my coworker Shay, who is somewhere back there, teaching a curriculum that we developed for adaptive sports that focuses on exactly those types of situations. What types of touch are okay? What types of touch are over the line? How do you communicate and challenge situations that are harmful, that are inappropriate? And I think, again, like I don't know the situation well enough that I want to specifically dive deep into it. But if our only two settings are harsh punishment and minimization and denial, then we are not going to do the work that we need to do to truly prevent abuse and violence. And we are either going to have controversies about somebody who was overpunished, or we're going to have controversies over why someone was lying or deserved it or was exaggerating, because we can't address the harm with the nuance it needs and it deserves. Thank you.
Thanks. I was curious what your thoughts are on the healthcare space as an intervention point. Like how can it advance or whatever?
Yeah, it's such an important space. And I think one of the most important shifts that has happened in the last probably 25, 30 years is to start viewing abuse as a public health issue and not just as a crime. Public health, maps imperfectly onto intimate violence, but what is so important about public health is that it focuses both on systemic changes and environmental changes to improve health and individual changes. You can change the law so that there's no smoking in restaurants and bars, and you can work with people to stop smoking. And public health really creates space for that wide range of interventions. Also, healthcare providers have more training in compassion. Some healthcare providers.
They're an institution too, Meg.
They're an institution,
They're an
but
institution.
like in listening and compassion and helping. And that could be a relationship that feels safer to access and has less stigma around it than going to a rape crisis center. Like saying, I have a doctor's appointment, most people would not stigmatize that. So I think there is a lot of potential. There are a lot of folks in this room who work in the healthcare space more than me, so they probably have better answers. If anyone feels like raising your hand, you can, but there is a lot of potential.
So since you were almost getting there at the end with Shamika's question, this book launch in this moment is obviously striking and profound in the moment that we're in terms of the cost of fear. I would just love you to kind of thread that needle a bit more around what it means to be living in this current climate.
Right. Yes.
In relation to
what it means to be living in this current climate is that the dynamics that are heartbreakingly familiar to anyone who has survived domestic violence or worked with survivors, where somebody is unpredictable, sometimes does the right thing, is other times very violent, is basically happening to all of us on a national scale. The ways that our law enforcement system is targeting immigrants, the ways that our health care system is targeting transgender people, our education system. It is coercive control. It is all of the harms that are both overt and subtle that anybody who has worked with survivors is unbelievably familiar with. And understanding, one opportunity that could come from this moment, if we could even imagine an opportunity, is a kind of conversation about what coercive control in a power imbalanced relationship really looks like. Because it's not, the made-for-TV special where everything is horrible all the time. Like, some of us are gonna have some good days. And some of us are gonna feel a little bit of relief when the federal government doesn't do the horrendous thing. And then, going back to the title, The Cost of Fear, what it provokes in us is this constant anxiety of not knowing what we can trust, what ground is solid, what we can do, what lawsuit is going to work, what lawsuit isn't going to work, what lawsuit is going to be successful, but what tech bro is not going to comply with it. So I think we are all living in the reality that survivors know all too well. And let's just say we are not all living in it equally. Folks with undocumented relatives or asylum-seeking relatives, transgender folks, any number of other groups are facing it much more acutely than folks who have more privilege.
What you've spoken to tonight is victim-oriented, and the book is victim-oriented. Do you have opinions on the other side of the equation, that is, the point of view of the perpetrator?
I guess I would say the book is more oriented toward what those of us who could be targeted can do for ourselves and our communities. And, there are people more brilliant than me who have the answers to how to work with and how to support folks who have caused harm and do cause harm. But I think when it comes to where our resources go, the communities that have creative, survivor-led solutions and the communities that are most affected by gender-based violence have a lot of wisdom, and sex offender registries have a lot of resources.
Hi, thank you so much. I came across this event pretty happenstance, so it's been really wonderful to just learn more. And as I heard you talking a little bit about avoiding the white van, and it only happens in all these misnomers or misconceptions we have as individuals who could be targeted. I fear I've definitely been indoctrinated with all of those, and I'm wondering what is the flip that you would offer to when many of us walk outside right now, I know that you're not saying don't avoid the white van.
Right.
Maybe you are, I don't know. But
I'm saying choose your risk tolerance and choose your quality of life.
yeah, exactly. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. And I think that is one of the beauties of feminist or empowerment self-defense training is when I have somebody walking behind me, or I have a large group of drunk young men near me, what I visualize in my mind is what I would do if they attacked me. And being able to see myself as a person with agency in that moment really helps me not be diminished by my fear. And the reality is all of the sort of stranger danger crimes that, we're all indoctrinated in, the risk of experiencing those crimes is greater than zero. Just because something is rare does not mean it never happens. And just because you may have experienced a less common type of violence does not diminish your trauma or diminish your experience. So one of the things that I hope for with teaching concrete resistance skills is giving folks the idea and the vision and the experience of options in those types of situations. So it's not that, you suddenly don't feel cautious, because frankly, I don't want anyone stepping off the curb in Harvard Square and getting hit by a car. Please do be cautious. But you can approach situations that feel unsettling or feel scary with agency and with clarity about what the options are and what the choices are, and with the absence of self-blame if someone else chooses to hurt you. Yes, Mom. My mom has a question.
Your mom's glasses are fabulous. Could you please tell her?
And Shamika thinks your glasses are fabulous.
Well, the woman is fabulous.
This is my fabulous mom.
My experience is clearly dated. I really feel over the hill here. But
lobby. Lobby wasn't a dirty word. Do you politically, do you go to Washington? Do you bring, can you
Yeah.
bring certified people and talk to your local representative? I mean,
Absolutely.
is there any of that going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the folks that I interviewed for the book was lobbying at her local school board to fight book bans and facing harassment and intimidation and facing threats with her children. So we do need to lobby. We do need to advocate. And there's people, again, like I'm looking around the room, like there's so many people who have more to say about lobbying than I do. So please talk to all the fabulous sexual assault and domestic violence advocacy community folks in the room. But I will say wonderful things about our state domestic violence and sexual assault coalition, that a lot of the legislative advocacy agenda has really broadened in the last 5 to 10 years. Some of the lobbying is for funding for emergency services, but some of the lobbying is for expungement of people's criminal records if they were compelled to commit the crime as part of the abuse and now are not eligible for public housing or any number of services. And some of the advocacy locally in Cambridge is around shifting resources to community solutions to violence and harm and crime so that it's not the police or nothing. So a lot of the lobbying is about resourcing the different solutions. I think you in the back had a question, right?
And I feel like the last question.
Oh, that was the last. Oh, that was.
It'll be the last question.
The next one is.
I
Okay.
want it.
Okay.
This question actually kind of ties, I guess, into that one. We've spoken of kind of on the individual level, so the person to whom harm had happened, and we've spoken a little bit on the organizational level and the politics. But do you mind speaking a little bit more about the community level? So
Yes.
people on the peer or bystanders.
Exactly. Yes. One of the things that is so complex about this issue is that when it comes to a public health issue like drunk driving, you change social norms, you change laws, you popularize the designated driver, and all of those community-based interventions prevent drunk driving. And when it comes to the more intimate forms of violence, you can't like secretly drive drunk in your bedroom after you spoke out against it, but you can secretly sexual assault after you've spoken out about it. But changing the social norm, changing the peer culture, changing the expectation about what is and is not acceptable is so necessary, because that's where we learn what's going to happen if we speak up. That's where we learn if our friend is someone we can trust. That's where we learn if somebody is just going to let harassment and sexism and racism and ableism go unchallenged. And the strategies to change social norms and to change the community and the strategies to interrupt the harm need to be complementary. And when they go together, they are more effective. And also, Impact Boston teaches a lot of bystander skills and a lot of skills to give people the support for intervening in an unsafe situation and then maintaining their own safety if the folks who are causing harm turn their attention against them or their harassment against them. Thank you, Shamika.